Well, good morning, almost good afternoon. It really warms my heart that so many people came out to hear a policy speaker who is at the near end of their career, the part before apogee. It really excites me that we're able to bring in someone who covers an important area and is a figure in a field that is expanding and growing. So this is a talk of the Baker Institute Associate Roundtable. I'd like to acknowledge very quickly the support of our co-chairs, Molly and Wesley Ward and Cody Sutton, who their leadership drives this. They are the people that allow fellows like me to reach out into the community and pass the items. Oh, and by the way, I'm Chris Bronk. I'm the Fellow for Information Technology and Policy here at the Baker Institute. I will also invite you all, is Star somewhere in the room? If you enjoy what you hear here today, I would encourage you to reach out to Star. She's in the back corner, raising her hand. One of our superb staffers here. So why are we here? Let me be short with introductory remarks. A few months back, I decided we did an open house or a study break with students. And we asked them, what are you reading? And, these are policy-interested students. What are you reading? And we expected to hear, oh, I read, the Atlantic Monthly or Foreign Affairs or, some other bound magazine you get in the mail. And they said, oh, I like this blog and I like that blog. And one of my students said, I really dig, the Wired magazine Danger Room and that War is Boring guy. War is Boring guy, okay. Anyway. So David Axe is a reporter, the War is Boring guy, and he'll explain to you probably a little bit as he did at dinner on why war is boring, except for those really exciting short parts in between the boring parts. His bio, since 2005, David has reported from some nice places like the UK and Japan, but mostly war zones like Iraq, Lebanon, East Timor, Afghanistan, Somalia, Chad, Nicaragua, Kenya. He's a contributor to the Washington Times, C-SPAN, Wired, and a number of other publications. He's written several books. Army 101, Inside ROTC in a Time of War, was his first. War Bots, about U.S. military robots in Iraq and Afghanistan. And this summer he will have a book on the enthralling topic of military logistics. It's from A to B, how logistics fuels American power and prosperity. Logistics is one of those topics that doesn't come up enough when we're talking about foreign policy. That matters when you think about how much it costs to keep a Marine in Kandahar, about $1 million a year, or what a gallon of JP8 fuel, which is the universal fuel for the military, what it costs in Afghanistan, which I've heard numbers as high as $100 a gallon. Our whole staff, so David's unique journalistic and authoring moves into the area of the graphic novel. And before David leaves today, I will make sure he has a copy of Secretary Baker's graphic novel. As some of you know, the Secretary has been subject of a graphic novel about his career and life. It is obviously a real medium if Secretary Baker has chosen it. He's written 2 of these with collaborators who do the drawing. Warfix, his first, and more recently War is Boring, Bored Stiff, Scared to Death in the World's Worst War Zones, a book that my wife is an enormous fan of because she read it, put it down, and said, oh, he gets that whole thing. So why is he here? Well, what is that thing? And we talked about this for a few minutes at dinner. It's not the adrenaline fix of getting shot at. Now, Winston Churchill is reputed to have said that there's nothing more exhilarating than, and I'm paraphrasing, being shot at and missed. That is indeed exhilarating, but it is the telling of the story, to be the witness to history, to document it for future generations to consider and unravel. That is the addictive element. Anyone who has written, in the moment reporting of events of life and death, of human drama, it's an enormously addictive set of challenges that the writer can engage in, and something I enjoyed doing immensely when I was a Foreign Service officer. So why is David here? He writes comics books, he goes to scary places. This is interesting. He's here because journalism is changing. The model of press organizations, investigative reporting, and the whole role of the Fourth Estate as a watchdog on the political system has changed. We have 60 Minutes to thank for this. Once they realized how to make money off of news, the game changed. David is a self-financed news organization who goes to other parts of the world to get stories. This is the future of journalism. Journalism is dangerous. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, 44 members of the press around the world were killed either doing or for doing their job in 2010. It's dangerous business. Going to war zones and getting the story is something that average folks in America don't typically think about doing. But there are many who do it well all over the world, and they're an amazing cadre of people. Journalism is vital. Journalists around the world give us an incredible view, largely thanks to the internet, of what's going on now. When I was a college student, getting a copy of the Soviet paper Pravda was a big deal. Now you can get Russian news wherever. Your only inhibiting problem is, do you speak enough Russian to get it? Or do you trust Google's translation? For us here in this think tank, journalistic products are invaluable to the policy recommendations we make, and equally valuable to the policymakers in foreign affairs, government, and in the intelligence community. And I've had colleagues at three-letter agencies say to me, this blogger really got it before any of us did. How does that happen? And that gets to my final point. The web is everything. People are talking not about just a revolution in Tunisia or a revolution in Egypt, but internet revolutions by citizen journalists who are getting points out to people around the world through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. And the news and politics are intermingling now in a way that is hard for us to explain. So that's the milieu in which David works. David covers the hard side of journalism, which is war and peace. And he has a provocative angle for us to think about. It covers where we're thinking about for our national security in the next decade. It's something all of us think about a little bit, just about every day, I would imagine, if you're either in the corporate sector or the government sector. And with that, I just also I'll stop pontificating about David and let him do the talking for himself. He asked for a lengthy question and answer. He has some prepared remarks. And the protocol on question and answer, we're streaming this via the web. So there are two microphones placed at these quarters of the room. To ask a question, if you can just come up to the mic, then we get you on the recording, so people who watch the webcast know what the question is. And finally, let me dedicate this lecture to two journalists who've affected my work, who fell in the line of their work. Kenji Nagai, who was killed in Rangoon in 2007, and Francisco Javier Ortiz Franco, who was assassinated in Tijuana in 2005. So on that upbeat note, acknowledging journalists who've done their job very well and have chased the story, whatever the consequences, I'll give the room to another who does that as well.
Right, so my name is David Axe, and I'm a freelance war correspondent working mostly online, but also in comics, but I'm not really going to talk about that. We can talk about that in the Q&A. There's a point I wanted to make, something that I've been meditating on for quite a while, and normally I speak without a script, but I don't want to get this one wrong, so I'm going to read my brief prepared statement, which is sort of a more philosophical thing than talking about the nuts and bolts of modern journalism in this fractured internet age. Let's handle that in the Q&A, but for now, I want to talk about what I think, based on my limited experience, what I think war is really for, and some of our assumptions surrounding conflicts we go into and why we do so. And I want to make that point in the interest of preventing what and not that I have much power to prevent something like this, but in the interest of addressing a future conflict, which could be the most devastating that could ever occur in modern times. So I'm here to talk to you about war, about what war really means, how we often choose war because we are uncomfortable with the alternative. Specifically, I want to argue against a future war that many people believe is inevitable. I'll be brief because I most look forward to interacting with you directly in the question and answer period. Politics by other means, that's Karl von Clausewitz. A contention by force, Cicero. A relation not between man and man, but between state and state, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. These are the dominant definitions of war, evolved over centuries. They make armed conflict seem rational, even orderly. But the word war is Frankish German and actually means confusion or discord. I believe that is the truer nature of war, and more to the point, the basic driver of many conflicts. We fight because we are confused and afraid. We fight in a vain attempt to quell our own fear of ambiguity and the future. We fight to control each other and history, and we fail. I believe peace is an ambiguous state, and living in peace demands a certain acceptance of that ambiguity. This is a challenge in my own life. My own failure to embrace the uncertainty of peace largely explains why I've spent the last 7 years at war. The ambiguity of peace also explains why we as Americans are involved in so many wars, and why we are currently hurtling headlong toward what could be the biggest, bloodiest war in many decades. Peace drives us crazy, so we manufacture conflicts to deliver us from our madness. In the summer of 2008, I was in eastern Chad, reporting on the Darfur conflict. Rebel groups in Central Africa fight on a calendar determined by seasonal rains. By the time I arrived in the town of Abishe, near the Sudanese border, the rains were on their way, and so the rebels had gone to ground, or so I was told. Then one night, gunfire erupted outside my guest house. I grabbed my camera and plunged into the darkness. My photographer, Ann Holmes, begged me not to go, arguing that the darkness made it impossible to take good photos or even to determine who was fighting whom. I ignored her, but she was right on both counts. Staring at an intersection alive with gunfire, I believed I would die if I moved forward, but still I moved, and luckily I did not die. I fell in with a crowd of Chadian army deserters fleeing the fighting. Before they attacked me and stole much of my equipment, these deserters told me that rebels had invaded the town, initiating the combat. But later, an EU peacekeeping force assured me there had been no rebels. They said the fighting was likely sparked by one spooked Chadian soldier shooting at shadows. Another soldier mistook the first shooter for a rebel and shot back. Soon the whole town was under fire as soldiers mistook each other and civilians for rebels. I stepped over bodies in the street, people who died for no other reason than someone was scared, and felt better directing random violence at the murky object of his fears. The false reassurance of armed force ironically resulted in chaos, panic, and death. That was just one battle in one war in one of the world's many conflict zones. But I believe it speaks to a bigger, more important phenomenon. As a country, we wage wars essentially similar to that pointless Chadian skirmish. The 2003 Iraq War was launched on a lie that we were all too eager to believe, for we were afraid of the potential consequences of simply doing nothing. The Afghanistan War initially targeted al-Qaeda forces hiding out in the country's mountains and deserts. Within a couple years, those terrorists were all dead or scattered, but we continued fighting anyone who would fight back. The Taliban, smugglers, poppy growers, local militias, whoever. The Afghanistan War hasn't been about counterterrorism for probably 8 years, but still we fight, for we cannot stomach not fighting. What terrible things might happen, we ask ourselves, if we leave? What chaos might result and how might it hurt us? As a nation, we prefer to remain engaged, even if remaining engaged means thousands of deaths. War means confusion no less than peace does, but war is a kind of confusion we can tolerate, for it's contained within action and plans and the comforting metrics of body counts, numbers of bombs dropped, and the names of assassinated enemy leaders. The press, of course, supports this wicked system by portraying war in the Clausewitz vein as coherent and useful. We fight because fighting makes us feel like we're exercising some control over our destinies. The same principle applies, I believe, to the wars we have not yet fought, but are preparing to. Today, the United States is arming itself for what some portray as an inevitable shooting war with China. That war is not inevitable. In fact, there are no compelling reasons for it. You can clothe it in defense of Taiwan partisanship or a freedom versus communism dichotomy, but the truth is that many of us crave war with China because only by shooting at them will we feel like we can exert some control over a global destiny we feel has been hijacked by 1 billion increasingly affluent Chinese. We fear the future world they might create. We would rather destroy that world, and us in it, than adapt to its surprises. The details are tedious. After World War II, China split between warring factions of oppressive near-fascists and equally brutal communists. The near-fascists settled on Taiwan while the communists controlled the mainland. The Cold War and the Korean War meant Communist China was our enemy. Our enemy's enemy, Taiwan, must then be our friend, a relationship codified in 1979 law. Both China and Taiwan slowly grew more democratic, though Tiananmen Square was a huge setback for China. Still, our allegiance to Taiwan never evolved to accommodate a more progressive China. In 1996, the U.S. Navy sent aircraft carriers into the Taiwan Strait in response to the mainland's periodic and mostly rhetorical threats against the island nation. In response, the Chinese poured an ever-increasing sum of money into developing a Navy and an Air Force capable of countering the U.S. military. The U.S. military responded in kind, even as relations between China and Taiwan warmed significantly. Today, the two Chinas are closer than ever, and war is less likely than ever between them. Meanwhile, China has become the world's second economy and arguably the most important U.S. trading partner. Still, the military rivalry continues. China tested an anti-satellite rocket in 2007, so 3 years later, the U.S. Air Force launched a robotic spaceship capable of disabling Chinese satellites. The Chinese then began working on their own similar spaceship. China fielded a ballistic anti-ship missile, so the U.S. Navy has invented missiles to shoot down the Chinese missile. The Americans developed a fleet of radar-evading fighters and bombers and deployed them to Guam, so the Chinese added radars and missiles and began work on their own stealth fighter, which first flew late last year. Back and forth, tit for tat, the Pacific arms race has not only continued despite China's peaceful rise, it has actually accelerated. And today, despite China being involved in precisely 0 external conflicts, compared to America's 2 major wars and several minor ones, many U.S. politicians, pundits, analysts, and generals consider China to be America's #1 rival and our most likely enemy in any future world war. To many, this war seems inevitable. Let me be clear, war with China would have no winners. Such a conflict could kill millions, wreck the world economy, and devastate the world's natural environment. Moreover, it would be a pointless war, one we fought only because we fear a future where we are not the world's sole superpower. China's rivalry with Taiwan never directly affected the United States, and today is frankly irrelevant. China has not threatened the US or our closest allies. Modern China has committed just one serious crime against America. It has grown large and powerful after 20 years of global US dominance. China threatens our perceived destiny as the world's sole leader. We cannot stand to imagine a future that we share with the Chinese. We would rather fight them than live with them. A war with China would be the ultimate example of a manufactured war, one fought not for true reasons of national interest, but because ambiguous peace plain drives us crazy and we feel compelled to take action, any action. It would be just like that battle in Abishai, Chad, all violence for no gain, just like Iraq, just like Afghanistan. Any true comfort we derived would be fleeting. In its wake, we'd be left with only our self-destructive compulsion to make war and its awful mounting toll. Trust me, this toll is something that I understand on a personal level. Fortunately, this war with China is one we have not yet fought, and one we can avoid. Mostly that means doing nothing, or at least less. By that I mean ending the arms race, restraining our anti-China rhetoric, and backing away from legal obligations to defend Taiwan. Such changes might seem to mean surrendering a measure of influence over the world. They might seem to mean accepting risk. This is true. But we must ask ourselves which is better, the chance that conflict might result from our inaction, or the certainty that conflict will occur as a result of our warmongering. We must simply accept that the future is unknowable, and world power is something we increasingly must share with people whose language and customs most of us don't understand. We need to relax and resist the impulse to open fire on ambiguity as if bullets could kill fear. Thank you. And now we can talk about that, or journalism and blogging and comic books, whatever you'd like.
Thank you for your comments.
You're welcome.
Many, many years ago, my very distant ancestors built an empire that lasted more than 2,000 years. In that undertaking, they developed these words of wisdom, si vis pacem para bellum, which translated from Latin means, if you want peace, prepare for war. How actual do you think these ancient words of wisdom are in today's world?
I think we are over-prepared for a war that, to me, seems, to a potential war, to me seems arbitrary and pointless. I don't understand why we are, I don't know how many of you are familiar with our Pacific arms buildup, but it's massive. Not unprecedented, but massive. And I don't know why we are doing that, especially in a time of flattening budgets and economic distress. I don't understand why so many people perceive China to be an enemy. I don't believe in, I'm not a pacifist. I don't believe in not preparing for self-defense. And there are certainly plenty of examples of good wars, wars we needed to fight, or I don't know if good wars is a phrase I'm comfortable with, but necessary. I don't understand how squaring off against China counts as that sort of thing. So it's not that you can't achieve peace through strength, but what kind of strength? Where do we apply it? Where is it directed? Why are we not, I mean, Great Britain spends, you know, a greater percentage of its GDP on defense than most nations. Are we surrounding Great Britain with nuclear submarines? No. Why? Why China, not Great Britain? So why do we choose to direct our sort of martial energies and our preparations against the nation that should be our strongest partner? And understand that the relationship's complicated and will take a lot of working out over years, but China should be our greatest ally, not our enemy. I don't know if that answers your question. So peace through strength. Yes. What kind of strength? Where is it directed? Yes, sir.
It seems that part of the problem is we're almost like a dog chasing his tail. We have the politicians, we have the military, it affects our economy, and we just keep spending. A good example is, and fortunately the House of Representatives defeated it, wanting to manufacture jet engines, which the Defense
Pentagon
Department
didn't want,
said
right?
they didn't need.
The alternate engine for the F-35, right?
A few years ago, we built an aircraft carrier that the Navy didn't want, but a senator from Mississippi wanted to keep his shipyard busy. One of the problems is that if we cut what we're spending on the military, we hurt the economy. We lose jobs. So what's the solution?
Well, I don't know what the solution is, but that leads into another point I'd like to make, which is that if you prepare for war, even if you prepare sort of in a vague sense for war, and you don't have a particular enemy formally identified, because for all of my ranting, it's not that the Defense Department has not like officially designated China as our major enemy. It's just sort of a widespread perception and accepted truth in the Beltway. But if you prepare for war, you're more likely to fight it. If you've got a gigantic army lying around, you're going to use it. You're more prone to use it than you would if you had to create one from scratch in order to pursue some ill-begotten conflict. So I believe we are over-prepared for the world's security challenges. And as a result of being over-prepared for them, we're going to create security challenges that we will then fail to address with the very mechanism that created the challenges in the first place. Yeah, dog chasing his tail, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Another way to say that is, if we want to be an economic or superpower, remain a superpower, why don't we just innovate technologically and remain on top that way through partnerships with other countries rather than start a war that gets us nowhere, like you said. So.
I agree, but these things are all rooted in culture. And I'm not old enough or wise enough to really understand it completely, but I believe we as a culture are more comfortable with military force as a way of exerting influence on the world than we are with softer kinds of power.
Seems like our enemy is ourselves when we refuse to innovate. My real question was, Europe seems to be avoiding military spending and staying out of wars. Why can't we, follow them?
There's no reason we can't.
Why don't we?
I don't know. Politics. Somebody said politics. What does that mean? War is useful. You mean politically useful? That's true, and it would probably take a more profound political mind than mine to understand it exactly, but you're right, war is useful. It's a way of, somebody help me out here. How is war politically useful for the ugly noise and organizing of electoral politics? Seriously, somebody help me out here. It's a distraction? Leadership. Yeah, it does demonstrate like a sort of macho form of blunt force leadership, but I'd like to see leadership that's... Yeah, a boogeyman. There we go. I'm a huge fan of doing nothing. I didn't mean that to sound the way it did. It's a very careful balance you have to strike between doing stuff and not doing stuff. And I can give you a really boring example from my own life. I send out a lot of magazine pitches because I have to get paid, right? So I got to write for these magazines. I'm constantly sending out ideas. Once you send out the idea, you just got to let it go. You can't be constantly harassing the editors saying, "Did you get my idea? What do you think? What do you think?" You do too much, you're going to lose the gig. You do just enough, you might get it. I had to learn to just do the thing once and do it right, and then relax and do nothing. The problem is it's not very dramatic. It's not very impressive. And I think, as silly as that example is, it could apply to our national politics. I'd love for us to be led by people who are comfortable with doing nothing, more comfortable with doing nothing, when nothing is what we need to do. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry. Yes. Hey, hi.
Yes, on the other mic.
Yes.
So I want to ask you a question not about war and politics, but about journalism on a shoestring.
Yes.
I wonder if you could speak to how you finance and pay yourself and pay your travel. When a New York Times reporter goes into a war zone, he's got a huge amount of infrastructure to rescue him if he gets in trouble. and you've got you.
Right.
So how do you do it?
Okay, good question and very complicated answer. It depends on where I'm going and when, and how lucrative the previous trip turned out to be. Starting out, I used credit cards. Lots and lots of credit cards. Balance transfers, things like that, you know, the credit card magic. But that was in 2005, 6. It was easier to get credit back then. Today, I don't use credit cards. I do make an effort to travel as cheaply as possible. And that often means making a calculation. Can I afford to go to this place and do this reporting? And if I can afford, even if I can afford the expenses, am I going to get a return on my investment, which then opens up another calculation, who's my competition? You may notice that I'm here and not in, say, Bahrain or Libya or wherever, Iran, covering the pro-democracy demonstrations. Certainly, that's conflict and has massive implications for our national security. But there's no way I can compete with Anderson Cooper or some big name from a major network. So those folks are there doing that work. And if I invest every penny I've got getting there fast and getting the access I need, I'm still not going to get any gigs. I'm not going to get paid because all that demand is being met by people who are bankrolled by, you know, wealthy organizations. And I'm not knocking those folks. I love Anderson Cooper. Who doesn't, right? But I have to do things differently. So I've got to go places where I know I am not going to be competing with big names and places I know I can afford. But then I can't go too far towards covering obscure conflicts because then there's no demand for those stories. So it's a constant, complicated calculus. And I may decide to lose money on one trip because I'm interested in the conflict or I think it's important or I think it may pay off down the road and then have to pay the bills later with another conflict. And the great example there is Afghanistan is my bill payer. It used to be Iraq, but now Iraq's not a bill payer. But now if I need money, I go to Afghanistan. So, for instance, in the fall I went to Congo because I've long wanted to go to Congo and cover the conflicts there. And it cost a lot of money, and I didn't make a lot of money because nobody cares about Congo. Now I'm going to pay back my Congo trip with a trip to Afghanistan in a couple weeks. And you know, that's part of the calculus. It's not just one trip. Do I decide, can I afford this one trip? It's more in my whole career, can I afford to do this? And how might I pay the bills for that thing? So it requires a lot of sort of scheming and plotting and long-range planning, and I still have to do it, even with all that plotting, I have to do it very cheaply and very carefully. I don't have any cash reserve, for instance, so if I get into trouble, I'm in big, big trouble. I mean, you can often buy your way out of problems. I can't. I do have health insurance, but it's only for like if I get an arm blown off or something. So short of that, I haven't been to a dentist in years. I can't afford it. Wow, this is really sounding pathetic. But these are the calculations I make. I'm willing to accept. You should see my apartment. It's about as big as 3 of these tables squeezed together. I live cheaply, and I pour every penny I've got into my work. And I don't mean to sound sad. I'm not. It's worth it. It's very worth it. Absolutely. People who are willing to make that kind of sacrifice, at least starting out, are the kinds of people who are going to be doing journalism as we move forward. I don't think that the Anderson Coopers of the world are going away, but media is becoming increasingly fractured because of the internet and because of cheap digital technology. Anybody can do it. The people who will do it, especially the stuff on the fringes like what I do, the people who do that are going to be the folks who want to do it so badly that they don't care if they can't afford lunch or the dentist. And if they, I don't plan to ever retire, for instance. I'm just going to do this until somebody finally blows me up. Did that answer your question?
That's pretty good. I mean, wow. So let's see, quick follow-up. Do you get gigs now where somebody says, hey, I want to have you go to X?
Yes.
And you know, is that now that you have a name, is that are you moving up some sort of a hierarchy?
Yeah, I mean, I get paid a little more than I did a few years ago, but I mentioned those credit cards, didn't I? So Yeah, I can get gigs. Oftentimes those turn out to be really disastrous. I once got assigned to go to Bangladesh to cover rural development. And I'm interested in not just in actual shooting wars, but the developing world and security and economic problems that sort of underpin conflicts. So I do a lot of that kind of work too, refugees and food security and things of that nature. So I was going to go to Bangladesh. I got asked to go to Bangladesh by Land O'Lakes Butter. They were going to say they're going to pay me a fortune to go to Bangladesh and to do some photography and write some copy for some kind of report they were doing. And I signed on to it. I was like, yeah, I'll go to Bangladesh and make 10 grand to shoot photos of butter churn. And but then, like, once I'd agreed to do it, I discovered that the thing had evolved into something else. Basically, I was writing a glossy brochure, and I had been instructed. They said, okay, so when you go to this collective, this farm, this dairy collective in Bangladesh to shoot these photos, don't photograph the chemical cesspool beside the building, because we don't want that in, that's a byproduct of our work there, and we don't want that in the coverage. And also, like, don't ask the kids. We were supposed to visit with some kids and talk to them about how happy they were to be getting money from Land O'Lakes Butter for this thing or that. And they said, but don't talk to the kids about, the program. We actually shut the program down, they said. So the kids are going to tell you that, yeah, we love the butter program, but it's no longer here. What happened to it? Can it come back? They wanted me to pretend that it was still current. So they're like staging all these things. Not that all big gigs are that wicked, but this one was, and often they turn out to be that way. I don't mean to sound like some kind of, I don't know, uppity idealist who can't compromise and can't work for a client, but it's so much morally simpler if you just do your own thing. That answer your question? Oh, I didn't actually go, by the way. I canceled the butter gig. Well, it fell apart, but we didn't go. Yes, sir. Should I just back and forth? Yes, sir.
Thank you for coming. I don't work in foreign policy, but I had trouble seeing the China situation the way that you do. I get the impression that for the last 30-something years, we've worked closely with the Chinese to integrate our economies, and obviously our economy is dependent a great deal on China, and the Chinese depend on us, although perhaps less now than a few years ago. I don't see a war as inevitable. I don't really even see a war as likely. If anything, I feel that the greatest security threat in the world today is the possibility of a confrontation with Iran. So I'm wondering, why do you see things so differently than I do? I mean, I know we've had tension with the Chinese, and I know China's neighbors are uneasy about China's asserting itself, but I don't see why you think a war is inevitable.
Oh, I don't think it's inevitable. I think it's very evitable, and it must be evited. But because I cover, one of my bill pairs is covering military, the defense industry, military technology, and working for Wired, for instance, it's all just tech reporting. And there is a very clear and undeniable trend in recent years, and it's one that's accelerating, of the Pentagon rebuilding itself, redesigning itself for a planned or a possible, I should say, confrontation with China. It's a massive investment, very particularly focused on China. And I believe that if you prepare for a war, you become more likely to fight it by virtue of the preparation. World War I, anyone? Does that make sense?
Would our banks allow us to go to war with China?
I would hope not. But I'm not an economist, and I can't really, I wish I could comment on whether economic integration prevents conflict. I'm not actually sure it does. It might not. I mean, we think globalization is a new phenomenon, but actually it's been around for hundreds of years. And prior to World War I, the world was highly globalized, economically speaking, and the economic ties between the nations that ended up fighting each other in World War I were strong right up until the point of the war itself breaking out. So I don't really understand that interplay, but I'm not convinced that that economic integration is going to prevent us from steering ourselves toward a conflict. I believe that we are engaged in a massive military buildup designed to fight the Chinese. And there are many programs worth tens or hundreds of billions of dollars that I believe prove that point. And I believe that preparation places us at risk because it enables our tendency to fight wars because we're afraid of not fighting wars. And I mean, how far do we have to look for massive examples of that? We have 2 wars right now that I believe are both unnecessary, that we just can't, politically as a body, we as Americans can't imagine just simply not fighting the Iraq war in the first place, or in the case of Afghanistan, leaving tomorrow, which is what we should do. Thank you. I hope that answered your question, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. In '57, when I came to Houston, this is about spin-off. You know, all military spending, NASA spending is spent on Earth. Came to Houston to attend University of Houston, and Eisenhower passed the National Defense Act, building the interstate roads. I worked for 9 months at Central Freight Line. Still exists, the terminal still exists today. And after 9 months, went to work for Beto Equipment Company, which existed because of the National Defense Act, selling link belt speeder cranes. I ran their parts department. Graduated, got a job at NASA. One of our main jobs was to spin off military technology to industry. And we did a pretty fair job of that. One of the current astronauts is Lee Morin, working on telepresence of manufacturing glass bricks from regolith on the moon with controls from the Earth, which will be a spin-off of killing terrorists at weddings. Crazy, confused world.
Right.
But it's there. Question I have for you, what roles, personalities, are you aware of that may have played a big role in who we supported in the East Timor conflict?
I'm sorry, I don't think I understand.
What players at a level in our government played a major role in what our national policy was in the East Timor conflict?
What is our national policy in East Timor?
Well, what it was at the time, which was to support
the Indonesians?
Yeah.
That, I'm sad to say, is well before my time. When I was in Timor in 2007, I covered Australian, you could call it an occupation or peacekeeping operations, depending on your point of view. So it's more focused on military operations in Dili, especially around the time of their presidential election, and rebel groups in the jungle and things like that. So I don't actually know much about the politics of the Indonesian occupation. I wish I did. Can anybody answer that? Why did we have a policy of, I don't know, turning a blind eye to Indonesia and East Timor and back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s? Anybody? Because I can't. Okay. Sir, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Yes, sir.
I kind of like your idea that sometimes it's a good thing to do nothing.
Yes,
and
sir.
It kind of implies that we get into conflict sometimes because they're stimulating, they show leadership, they're more exciting, they seem like we're doing something. And yet, the title of your book is War is Boring. Could
yes,
you
sir.
kind of talk about that?
I can. That's a question that always comes up. It's a somewhat ironic title, though not entirely. I can't really speak to the experience of soldiers, but I certainly can talk about what it's like being a war reporter. And it's 99% sitting around, that is boredom, and about 1% excitement. So in the 7 years that I've been doing this, if you added up all the minutes of running and jumping and things blowing up and getting shot at, and the action, all the action, the stuff you would see on in a movie or on TV, if you added all that up, I've had about an hour of it in 7 years of covering conflict. We live in a world of mostly low-intensity conflicts. I'm not going to say whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It certainly, I guess, beats trench warfare. But one of the results of covering a low-intensity conflict is that it's just low intensity. So you end up chasing around the action to hang your stories on. And that has a, wow, this is a subject of a whole nother talk. What is journalism? How do you pick your subjects? How do you pick which of the moments makes a story? Covering war today is really boring because there's really just not much shooting. I'm sorry, I'm meditating on this. Just give me a second. Going into my first overseas gig in early 2005, I went to Iraq. And I don't think I was a fool, at least not entirely. But I think I did expect a war that was a little more Hollywood than what I found. And I'm not actually going to blame Hollywood for that. I'm going to blame mainstream media coverage, which tends to focus on the moments of excitement. And hey, I'm guilty of this too. On the assumption that it's the excitement that makes the story. So I imagined going into covering Iraq the first time that there was a lot of excitement, because I was seeing a lot of that on TV, that there was a lot of shooting and vehicles maneuvering and people running around and things blowing up. Only to discover when I got to Iraq that wasn't the case. I spent a whole lot of time sitting in Humvees or talking to soldiers who were talking to Iraqis, a lot of people just talking about things. And that's the nature of conflict these days. So I discovered that war was more boring than I thought it would be. Now, there are times when it's not boring at all, and I wish it were. Chad, for instance. But the title of the book also speaks to my disappointment with war as a concept, which is kind of what I was driving at in my prepared remarks, that I think I may in the past have understood war to be useful, to be a tool, and to work clearly and decisively. If you planned it right and you targeted the right people, you made history, you solved problems with war. And I understand now that's not the case. We often have no idea why we're fighting, really have no idea why we're fighting or who we're fighting. And we have no idea what's going to happen as a result of it. I think Afghanistan is the best case, the best example of that. There are 15 wars in Afghanistan, not one. And we fight people in Afghanistan who we can't even identify. Somebody pulls a trigger, so somebody else pulls a trigger. We don't know what their motives are or what they want or what will make them happy, except maybe us leaving. And I've come to understand that as, if not being the rule, being the case, often being the case. And so war as a concept is really disappointing. It's just not as good at doing what I think many of us understand it to be for. It's just not all that useful. So in that sense, boring meaning disappointing, war is boring. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you for your comments.
You're welcome.
I would like to get back to the kind of your overarching point, which is
yes.
You wish we lived in a government where our leaders would be more passive when it came to pursuing conflict. I'm just wondering, isn't there something more active we can do to stop the conflict? So you're saying that in this specific war race, this arms buildup, there's kind of this tit for tat where China built a satellite, and then we built a satellite that's an anti-satellite satellite, and then there we are now kind of going back and forth. If our economies are talking to each other, why aren't our militaries talking to each other? Why isn't this active role that we can kind of perform back and forth between China and the United States that says, hey, listen, we kind of understand what's going on. Why can't we just kind of stop this?
Well, one thing you're talking about is military-to-military relationships. And
yes.
Here I have to actually turn the tables and blame this on Beijing. The U.S. military actually has its kind of policy, its habit to build formal relationships with even rivals. And you see this all over the world. The military trains with armies that even at times have been our enemies. I mean, as recently as 2 years ago, Russians were the bad guys, right? But we still hold training exercises with the Russians. Our generals meet with their generals, and there's a dialogue. They call it military-to-military relations. And, but we don't have that on a sustained basis with China, and not for a lack of Americans trying. It's China who has refused to build those on a sustained basis. Now, I don't think that lack of transparency and that lack of a dialogue is a good reason for the U.S. to then assume that conflict is inevitable and to prepare for it as rigorously as we are. That raises again the question of ambiguity. We don't have formal military ties, sustained formal military ties with China, and lacking those, we then could perhaps understandably be a bit skeptical about their motives. But I'm saying that it's not worth the risk of inciting a war in order to prepare on the basis of the fear derived from that lack of transparency. I think there's other ways to judge what China is and what it wants and what the Pacific can be for all Pacific nations, including us. We don't have to have those formal military ties in order to not prepare to fight China. Right. That said, they would be very, very helpful. And you know, if I could address China, as if you know, I could speak to the whole nation, but if I could hand a memo to to the chief of the PLA, it would be, come on, military ties with the U.S. I mean, everybody will benefit from that. So that would be one great place to start, but that's going to take both parties coming to the table and agreeing to it.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Yes, sir. I think they told me this is our last question, but I'm happy to speak to anyone after the formal question and answer period ends. Yes, sir.
All right. This will be a good one.
Good.
Perhaps a bit complex, but thank you very much for your
yes, sir.
Insights, particularly in the prepared remarks, and I'll try to stick with that topic. Your prepared remarks painted war as this event that arises from fear.
Yes, sir.
And the question that I'm posing to you is simply, isn't fear justified in many cases? Were we not justified in fearing Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong? Do we not have reason to fear that China is an amalgam of cultural pulls, gives and takes from a lot of different tribal areas that may be just as volatile as the Middle East? We just don't know because of the way Mao killed his 60 million in his Cultural Revolution, in which he took out the journalists and the educated, the PhDs. It seems to me that we are trapped in what you described as this inevitable arms race to get prepared for a war which we hope is not inevitable. But isn't human nature going to give us the fear sooner or later that war is inevitable? Thank you.
Yes, sir. That's actually an excellent question. I wish I probably can't answer it in a way that does the question justice. But I look back on, I'm only 32, and I look back on the wars of my lifetime and the wars that I've been personally involved in as a reporter, Iraq and Afghanistan. And I see both of those as conflicts that in their current, well, Iraq a few years ago, but Afghanistan now, were sustained by an irrational, unfounded fear. I can't speak to World War II. That probably was a justified fear. But currently we have demonstrated a bad fear function. Our fear function's not working right. We are too scared of the wrong things. I believe that, oh wow, I'm going to open up a whole can of worms here. After 9/11, our response to 9/11 was completely wrong in almost every way. And we did more harm to ourselves and to the world with our war on terror than the terrorists did to us. Not that I'm not excusing terror, but how many people have died needlessly in the wars that we launched to address the fear that we felt after the towers fell. China's no Nazi Germany. I don't think we need to be that afraid. I think we must not be that afraid, because we need a course correction as a country. We've become too militarized, too aggressive, too scared. And I think that there are ample examples of just wars, but we don't fight them anymore. And we need to learn to identify them and only fight those wars. And we're bad at it right now. We're very bad at it. Does that answer your question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, don't we have to be prepared to fight those wars?
Yes, sir.
I agree with you that we're fighting economically based. Fighting a lot of conflicts. Ultimately going to. Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't possibly repeat that, so I'll just suggest that we have to be prepared in the event that that one of our fears is justified. Do we not?
Yes, sir, I agree. It's a level of preparation and how that, and this comes down to a lot of fine policy points, but I believe right now we are too oriented on building up a Pacific military force that is designed to fight China, as if that were necessary or a good idea.
Thank you very much. Me in here?
Just
can we just first.
Is it brief?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well, you know, from what I've gotten derived from this conversation is hegemony. You haven't said much about hegemony, but it seems that's what is if it's not the primary fuel of conflict, it sure is a biggie. I mean, just hegemony, whether it's economic or military, that plays a big part. I mean, we're talking about fear. Fear of what? Fear of being number 2 or
right.
3 or 4 behind,
yes.
Getting behind. Sounds like
we shouldn't even think in those terms. I agree.
Exactly.
Cover article on Fortune that came out yesterday shows the billions of dollars we've dumped into the Middle East from our defense contractors so that they can have their wars. And it's not exactly hegemony, but it's promotion of war, and that's in the last 2 years.
Yes, sir. Great. Thank you very much.
I think we have to. Thank you. Anyway.
Oh, fantastic. Good. Thanks. Sir, actually, I don't really carry cards. I don't have one on me. But would you like an email address? Yeah. A pen? Let's see if I have one.
What I'm wondering is.
What, sir?
Well, I am in retirement.